Welcome everybody to my show, Building Resilient Podcast. This is a podcast where you go beyond the surface and we explore the power of the human spirit. We go through adversities, we go through leadership, and we go through the healing process. I'm your host, Jose Pereira, and today I have a guest that you will love his story. I have a deepest admiration. He's not just a doctor. He's a real human being. So I'm going to introduce my guest. So I'm be honoring bringing to the stage to Dr. Brian Klausner. So Dr. Brian Klausner, he is the director of the medical director of the WakeMed Health and Hospitals in Raleigh, North Carolina. So giving a little bit of introduction of who he is, Brian is a doctor. He's graduated from Notre Dame for college. He went to the Georgetown University for the medical school, and he went to the University of Chicago for his residency. His first job when he was in the healthcare was working with homeless. We're going to be talking about this. He was working with homeless in Boston. And he has remained his entire career caring for those patients experiencing homelessness. He has worked to develop community-based and trauma-based clinic models, and he is currently the executive medical director of WakeMed Center for Community Health. He's a very well-recognized expert on trauma, healthcare justice, and homelessness advocacy. But at the same time, he's the author of a gripping book, The Gaps. It's a profound, unfiltered reflection of pain, humanity, and the urgent need for compassion in medicine in society. So I'm going to talk a little bit how I got introduced to Brian, and I'm going to give the mics to Brian. So in short, when I had barely a couple of weeks that I had returned from my hostel situation that I stayed during 5 years, I got connected to one of these wonderful foundations that today I'm very connected today with them. They do advocacy for the hostage community that is called Hostage US. Hostage US has a program how you can regain your life back from the mental, the physical, and even some kind of financial help that they give to you. But in the mental and the physical health, they do like a liaison, some collaboration with the WakeMed Medical Center. They do what they call the medical marathon. And they told me if I wanted to go through that process. So that's why I got invited to join that process. I stayed around more than 1 week in the WakeMed Medical Center, and there's where I could meet Brian. For me, meeting Brian was incredible because as he's an incredible person, an incredible human being, I knew about his advocacy for the homelessness, and I knew about his thought about the holistic view of the medicine. So we're going to be talking a little bit about this. So given this introduction, thank you to the show, Brian. The mics are yours.
Well, and thank you so much for having me. It's incredible to see you again and to be able to spend some time with you. So I really appreciate being on the podcast and just all the work that you've been doing in the last couple of years. It's been incredible, including your book. It was an amazing book. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Well, Brian, this show, we try to talk with a person from the human side. So talk me a little bit about you, how you decided to become a doctor, what moved you. Give me a little bit about your story.
Yeah. So grew up in California. So California kid until I went out to Notre Dame out in the Midwest. And then I've been kind of going across the country ever since. And I fell into medicine by accident. I went into Notre Dame as a mechanical engineer and quickly exited that path when my first report card was, I think, a 1.8 or something GPA. Engineering was not for me, but at the time I was loving my biology class, and I was doing really well in my biology class, and so it just kind of went from there. That I found out that I really was kind of a geek. I love science. I love the science of medicine, and I've always been kind of involved with service work, and so that's a perfect occupation for being able to kind of merge kind of that geeky scientific part with the altruistic service part. And it can be a really rewarding career. So went into medicine at Georgetown, as you discussed, and then we did 2 years of service work. I worked out in New Jersey, helping with a nonprofit that did supplemental educational programs in Newark. And after that experience, I knew I wanted to go into public health. So when I went to med school, I knew I wanted to do public health, and I did something called the National Health Corps, National Service Health Corps. So what that program is it will pay for your med school, which was great, but you give year for year back in a community that struggles to find doctors. And so when I was done with my residency, it was time to do my service. We looked on the list, and there was all these really exotic places that had no doctors, middle of Alaska, middle of Montana, all these places that my wife did not want to go to, and made it very clear she wasn't going to go to. And so we found this place, Boston Healthcare for the Homeless. We found a position at Boston Healthcare for the Homeless, and she was from Connecticut. And so it was an incredible location. But yeah, I was always a little bit nervous about working specifically with and dedicated to a homeless population. And I talk about that in my book. I had this kind of, my concern was I wanted to go help patients and populations that wanted to help themselves. And in hindsight, I held kind of what is a very common stereotype, I think, with people experiencing homelessness, is that it was kind of self-inflicted, that it was kind of their fault. But the location was awesome and the organization was awesome. So I went out there, and it was the most incredibly, humbling, awesome experience of my life. Not only the patients I got to work with, that shattered every stereotype I had, by the way.
Oh yeah.
But the staff I got to work with, and it was just Boston Healthcare for the Homeless. Those 4 years that I served there were amazing, and allowed that kind of foundation that gave me the education to really learn what, not only homelessness, but what is the root cause of human suffering and disease, and how expensive that can be, and then how we can actually start to address those root causes. So I just, I was extremely lucky, and I'm extremely grateful in hindsight that I had the opportunity. I got really lucky with that. And my whole career has been, I've loved it ever since.
I always remember, to the audience that are hearing this, when I met Brian, I didn't know about your advocacy for the homelessness. And I remember that one day you took me out to Raleigh to see, and you were talking about that. And I said, wow, what interesting. Because, Wakeman, the people don't know, is a huge center. It's really big. It's big, and very well equipped. So I remember you mentioning that behind the stories of somebody that's going through that homeless situation, there's always a story behind.
Oh yeah.
And that kept me coming to my mind. And every time now I see somebody that is going through that process, and now I see them with different eyes.
Right. Oh, that's cool.
I
that's
see
cool.
them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
There's always a story, and in that story, if we just shut up and listen, and I talk about that in the book, is we're not good at listening to one another, and especially we're not good about listening through stereotypes and bias. And
yes,
and that's been the kind of the incredible part of my career, is when you listen to the stories and you get to know the individuals. And that's where it kind of merges with, so how did I get involved with Hostage US, right? I mean, what's the connection there? And so much of it is like, my job is to be able to get to know and appreciate just the resilience of the patients that I'm working with, and their backgrounds, and the fact that they wake up every morning and somehow draw resilience out of absolutely nothing at times. And that is just, it's an amazing testament to the human spirit and the human, and again, so often found in the very individuals that society a lot of times will stereotype and bias away from. But what we see is in medicine, when you're working with, healthcare for unhoused individuals, they're a very sick population.
Yeah.
A lot of complex medical disease, a lot of complex behavioral health disease. And so the average age of death, a lot of times, of chronic homelessness in America, it hovers around 50. And so our job is not to stereotype bias and act on misconceptions. Our job is to help. You can boil down medicine as about two things. There's two things that we do in medicine. We try to get people to live longer and live better.
Yeah.
And we have to identify the root causes that prevent them from doing so. And when you do that, so it's not just heart failure and, cancers that are killing patients. You have to, if you're going to treat the cancers and the heart failure, you have to treat sometimes the underlying behavioral health issues that are seen in patients. And that was part of my journey as a doctor, is getting to come to grips with that. But more and more, when you look at the biology, the neurobiology, and the science behind it, to get to the behavioral health, there's so much trauma, so much historic trauma, so much childhood trauma in the patients that we serve. And it's not a coincidence, right? That childhood trauma that, we did one study where 74% of this group that we worked with at a local program for people who are unhoused and suffer from addiction, 74% experienced 4 or more adverse childhood events compared to the normal population, which is about 5 or 10, 12%, depending on what study you look at. And that's not a mistake. That connection between early trauma as a kid and downstream mortality rates, like, average age of death, like 45, 50, addiction, mental health, even the diabetes, that's not a mistake. And so to learn what that link is, and so a lot like what we do at the center here, trauma informed, trauma based. To get to the medical disease, you got to treat the behavioral health. To get to behavioral health, you got to treat the trauma. And so that's where so much of what we do is helping people navigate through trauma, behavioral health, and medical disease. And that's where the Hostage US tie came in, is like, we've developed a lot of trauma informed models. Hostage US is like, and we went in fully knowing the trauma that we help patients get through at Hostage US is intense and extreme. And so it really pushed our trauma informed models. But that underlying foundation of, boy, so much of our health as people, of our happiness as people, about living longer, living better, is how we can address our mental health, how we can address stress, and how we can address trauma. And so similar to the awe that I have for the clients that I've served with Hostage US, it's the same for my patients who are experiencing homelessness. Like, this is amazing to see how they battle through their daily lives, and to be able to be part of that and be invited into that through our patients. It's fascinating, and it's an honor.
Well, you have been knowing a lot of people that have been coming back through Hostage US. Do you see any pattern in all of them that they can be?
Yeah,
talk about it.
I see. And again, it's really each case, as you know. I mean, in your book, as you talk about your experience, I mean, if you really stop and pause and focus as you're reading that book, as the reader is reading your book, like, it's almost impossible to put ourselves in your footsteps, or in your shoes, and how you guys came together. I just think a lot of times, as you see people battle through severe trauma, you see the greatest strengths of humanity kind of rise up, right? And so the bonds that you had, the friendships that you had, how you guys got together, how you guys, supported each other through, it's just really cool stories. But one of the patterns we see is, and I talk about this in the book around how it relates to my patients experiencing homelessness, is, and you talk about it a little bit in the book, is it's not so much, we see a lot of physical torture, we see a lot of mental health torture, we see a lot of constant bright lights and loud music, but the greatest pain that people will reference back to, and a lot of times the greatest sources of PTSD and trauma is that act of dehumanization, is people looking at you like you're nothing and treating you like you're nothing.
You're giving me goosebumps when you're talking about that, because I remember. I'm gonna say something before I forget.
Yeah.
When I was there, that I had the opportunity, I always talk about this. That I could read the book of Viktor Frankl, The Men on the Search of a
Yeah.
Meaning.
Yeah.
He always mentioned that the worst thing that they were going through that Nazi camp was that dehumanization. And for me, I always remember, Ryan, that these guys, they treat you like an animal,
Yeah.
and you feel treated as an animal. It, that tears you down. They
Mm-hmm.
can beat you, they can do anything, and you can support them.
Mm-hmm.
But that act really tears you down. Yeah.
Yeah. That act of being dehumanized. And it's interesting because that was it was probably when I decided to write the book, is when I was reading research from this neurosocial cognitive scientist, Lasana Harris, Dr. Lasana Harris.
Yeah.
And he was up at Duke for a while, and then he's over in England right now. But so this field of science studies how we socially interact, why we socially interact in the ways that we do. And so his study was interesting to me because he was studying how we tolerated, or how humans tolerate human atrocities, whether it be genocide in Nazi Germany or Rwanda. How can we tolerate the intense suffering of those around us? So the guards that were performing the torture, or the systems that were allowing this. And Jose, it was the most fascinating study. So he put a bunch of undergraduates from Yale under this functional MRI.
Okay.
And 1 second flash. So functional MRI shows how your brain works, right? So I can say, Jose, think of something scary, and this part of the brain would light up. Or Jose, move your right hand, and this part of the brain would light up. So it tracks the functionality of the brain. And so what he did is he put subjects under the MRI, under the functional MRI, and he'd flash these 1 second pictures of people in society. So milkman, teacher, military, these stereotypical pictures. And one of the pictures was, quote unquote, homeless addict. And what he showed in his study was that in every picture, the prefrontal cortex, the front part of your brain that is in charge of humanization, love, empathy, lit up in every picture besides the quote unquote homeless addict.
That was
nothing.
nothing.
Besides, and the part of the brain that lit up instead was the part of the brain that lights up when you look at a chair or an inanimate object. But even more importantly, that, and then the part of the brain that lights up for conflict resolution.
Wow.
And so his theory was, if you can dehumanize somebody and treat them like the chair, your brain is going to process it like that. So if you look back in history, that's exactly what. Hitler calling Jews vermin, Rwanda cockroaches. If you can label and dehumanize, and I think we're seeing some of this in our modern day society. You label and dehumanize your enemy, you can do whatever you want to them because they're dehumanized. And so for me, and I think about what you experienced and how you can look somebody in the eye and do what you can do. The interesting and the important thing is that instinct's in all of us. And I see it when I talk with people I know. They're like, oh, I respect you for working in, homeless medicine, but I just can't feel empathy. I don't know why. I feel like I should, but I can't feel empathy. And I think that gives us a scientific reason why. And all that is very dark and it could be depressing, except Dr. Lasana Harris pushed forward. So I had one client who was telling me, and this is also a consistent pattern, is guards that have tortured them or have done certain things at the end, coming back and either giving gifts or saying, I'm sorry, or doing something, right? That sometimes they were forced to do things out of necessity, or they themselves would be punished. But what he showed when he went back is he then went under the functional MRI, and he would just say one thing about the person, like, hey, this is Jose, he grew up in Texas, or hey, this is Jose, he likes bananas, or whatever it is. And all of a sudden, the prefrontal cortex lit up. And so his final theory, follow me on this because it's fascinating. I think it offers hope, is the pain of empathy is exhausting, or the time, the effort of empathy is exhausting and can be painful. If you go and walk around San Francisco and you put yourself in the shoes of all the homeless individuals there, you'd be paralyzed that they're existing there without any social communication. They're cold, they're hungry, they don't have any families, they don't have any friends, they don't have anyone saying their name on a daily basis. You would be paralyzed by empathy. So you reflexively dehumanize to protect yourself from that empathy, but it's not that hard to override. You can think, you can pause, you can humanize, and you can override that. And so as I'm sitting there, I'm learning this and I'm putting it in the context of my work. I then I kind of step back, I have 20 years of Catholic education. I kind of start putting in the context of my faith and being like, God, I mean, a lot of the religions across the plurality of world religions, this is kind of exactly what they're warning us about is like, judge not, you shall not be judged. You don't know what a person's gone through. Your job is not to judge. Your job is to love. And so all of a sudden I started putting all these like religious and philosophical teachings I've learned over the years into context because it's kind of saying the same things as beware of your human predispositions toward some of these instincts.
Correct.
And cognitively use your human ability to override and to outthink these instincts. And so it's been a fascinating journey, but everything that I've seen with Hostage US represents a lot of that is, the dehumanization part, some of the humanization part, how you can override that, how people get through the resilience that they're able to demonstrate as they do. So it's been an honor to work with the program. It's been fascinating to work with a lot of our individuals.
Well, as we were talking before we begin the recording, we did this week, the Hostage Awareness Week. This is my third year going there. And every time I go, Ryan, well, you wrote my book. My first chapter of the book talks when I went to the first, because really impacted me. But now this is my third year in a row, and I have the opportunity every year know more and more people that have come back, or their family, and some new people that are having a family that are victims. Oh, there's a common thing that I see in everybody is a strong resilience. But one of the things that really moves me is that movement that has been created, a sense of community, how the people are getting more and more involved. When my family went through this situation, because I have talked this with my wife a lot, she was alone. She was alone. She didn't know nobody going through this. She didn't know that nobody more was going through this situation. When she got connected to this community, and they created the Bring Our Family Home campaign. And by the way, here I have the flag that my family were part of the movement that created this flag. There were like 80 families that were involved in the creation, and today it's an official flag. So, how is that process now coming to grow and grow and grow? So now you see the people that even they're going through a tragedy, they have the sense of community, the sense that they belong to a community, and that really creates a strong resilience in the people. It's incredible how the people create that resilience. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, and it's also like, and I think about your book, you guys were in a little bit of a unique situation because you were there together, right? And you were dealing with this severe trauma as a group. And I think it's both in your book and that example, and then what you were just talking about. It does demonstrate. I have an example at the end of my book where I was treating this patient as he was dying of cancer, and he had a rough life, chronic homelessness, living on Boston Commons. And at the end, he came into what we call this hospice facility, where it's kind of like a hospital for people who are unhoused. They're too sick to be on the streets, but too healthy to be in the hospital. And he wanted to pass away there. And so we thought we would be able to do it in a way that was dignified and efficient. So we did it. But toward the end, he reconnected with his sister. He reconnected with his priest. He reconnected with some friends. He had some honest conversations with his longtime friends, on the Commons, telling him how much they meant to him and all this. And his one of the last words he said to me, and how I kind of end the book toward the end, he said, "Hey, this was really important because," and he had seen a bunch of trauma in his life. He had seen a bunch of dehumanization. He'd seen all this, but he said at the end it was so important because he was reminded that love is greater than hate and good is greater than evil. And he said, and in the end, that's all that matters. And again, that kind of resonated with a lot of the religious teachings and like, and so I would think like that group that you're talking about, that community, you said the word community, kind of reminds that, right? Being exposed to the darkest parts of humanity and coming back and having that community can kind of provide that reminder of, no, there is still good in the world, and the good can, hate tends to be weak and reflexive, and but love and community is ultimately can kind of dominate hate. And I think that's the therapeutic part of what you're talking about as well, is that sense of community to, what your wife didn't have when you were over there initially, and to be able to, tap into that. I think it's really important.
Yeah, you have been talking about your book group. Let's talk about your book. so,
Sure.
so Brian's book is called The Gas. It's not a typical doctor book. It's really a deeply personal book. So, talk more about your book, why you decided to write it, where they can find it, and talk about it.
Yeah, no, it was. I was telling you before we came on. I underestimated how hard it was to write a book. I thought it'd be, a year or two, and 4 years later, I'm, still cranking away. But I finally published it a couple months ago, and I almost felt obligated to write it. I never wanted to, I never thought I'd write a book. I never really wanted to. I loved it when I did it, and it was an incredible process. But it was basically, I just felt like, after at the time 15 years of working with people who are experiencing homelessness, and as the social crisis of homelessness was just keeps growing in the nation. I mean,
Oh yeah.
it's at record highs. Um, it's a problem, and in medicine, or just life in general. Like, if you, and it's an expensive problem. Like our patients, we hemorrhage taxpayer money in tolerating what is avoidable human suffering. A lot of our patients are easily into the six figures. And so not only is it expensive from a humanity perspective, it's expensive from a financial perspective. And if we're going to solve it, especially as it reached records high, like if you're going to solve a problem, you got to have two things. Number one, you got to understand the problem. You have to understand root cause, right? And it starts there, again, whether it's in medicine or life. And then number two, you then solve it in ways that are consistent with your values and beliefs. That's what problem solving is all about. Understanding root cause and then solving it in ways that are efficient and consistent with your beliefs. And I just felt like we were so off, not only in medicine, but in society, about how we misunderstand, how we stereotype. Again, the kind of the societal part of Dr. Lasana Harris's study is we reflexively blame, dehumanize, and dismiss. And not only is that expensive from a humanity perspective, but we're just going to continue to hemorrhage taxpayer money if we don't better identify root cause. And so that's what the book was about. And I started by saying, hey, understanding a mechanism is everything. That's how I start the book. And so the book is really trying to understand not only, and this is the kind of the interesting part, is not only the underlying pathologies, the issues underlying homelessness, the mental health, the physical health, the societal pathologies, but more importantly, our pathologies understanding homelessness, our internal pathologies, the fact that our brains don't light up, on the prefrontal cortex when we see someone experiencing homelessness. And I think if we understand both sides of that equation, then we will be, and it's been cool. It's been really awesome. It's been well received. And I think it's making, especially here locally, it's and if I try to explain this to anybody on the fly, like it's too hard to explain and get into the neurocognitive scientists, and all that. And so has been awesome because it allowed me to kind of share my experience, and if and when people read it, then help to facilitate conversations that seem that we're now getting more at efficiently addressing root causes and trauma and behavioral health instead of just kind of expensive shoulder shrugs.
Have you been invited to talk in conference about this with your book?
Yeah, no, it's been fun. Yeah, I've been able to talk with conferences, med schools.
Okay.
I kind of started out directing this toward the medical community. And then
Okay.
as I was writing it, I realized, well, our pathologies in the medical community around how we inefficiently deal with homelessness are just representative of the larger inefficiencies from a societal humanistic perspective, our human instincts around, some of these tendencies to blame and dehumanize. And so I branched it out. But yeah, it's been great. So we're being able to talk in the community and at schools.
How has
That's
been the feedback? How has been the feedback with?
It's been great. Yeah, it's been great. So I try not to geek out too much. So I try to explain the root causes, the mechanisms, but what I do is I'm able to mix in patient stories.
Is
Yeah.
there any story in particular that broke your heart that you put it in the book, or something that maybe you were thinking, oh, I'm not gonna put here? So something in particular that you want to talk?
Yeah, I mean, it's we just we have our Monday morning meetings and where we discuss our sickest patients, and I mean, every day there's kind of these miraculous stories of human resilience and overcoming barriers and having success, and yet at the same time um, a lot of our model is kind of, and we use analytics to identify who our sickest patients are, and then we'll bring them into the clinic and try to stabilize them and embed them into community resources. But a lot of our model is just working to prevent people from drowning,
Mhm.
and doing that the best we can. And the successes are awesome and are inspiring, but a lot of times we're not successful, and that's hard. And so that balance of being able to appreciate, and I say in the book, like even when we fail, like the fact that we tried or made some small improvement, the fact that that guy, the patient that I talked about, um, that was saying the good is stronger than evil, he still died. He still died young in the context of chronic homelessness, but his life was better because of our interaction. I'm sorry. We did something at least, and doing something is infinitely better than doing
Then
nothing.
how's your faith after all this process?
Oh, it's awesome. I mean, I think because it confirms a lot. I think a lot of, again, across plurality of world religions, I think a lot of the message is that good can overcome evil, and
Oh yeah,
we have an obligation not only to believe that, but we're called out to help prove that,
yeah,
right? Is
yeah.
to help prove it, is just not to shoulder shrug and dehumanize, but to think and overcome that, and to not judge and to love, and so if anything, um, being the power of humanity and the power of human beings especially in the prefrontal cortex, to overcome instincts and love and be altruistic and be selfless, like that's pretty uniquely human. And so being able to be exposed to that is definitely kind of a confirmation of faith, that you see in our daily interactions with people, a lot of the messages that are told in world religions.
So with all this expertise in trauma, what is something that still today you feel that the society doesn't understand about trauma?
Oh, I don't think they understand anything about trauma. We really don't. We really don't. I think the biggest, well, I would say maybe the biggest misconception um, is get over it, right? Is shrug it off and get over it. And you have to understand what trauma is and the science of trauma to understand how to deal with it. So, and we're learning more about that, So much of trauma, uh, I'll give the 2 minute answer to your question, but so much of trauma, like when you're in captivity, when you're, or, patients are experiencing extreme trauma, your reactive part of the brain, the limbic system part of the brain, the survival part of the brain is constantly on go,
Oh, yeah.
because you're constantly running from the bear. And so what that shuts down, and we see this with kids as well. And, I think a lot of the evidence around this comes from adverse childhood events. If you're a kid constantly working through abuse, or surviving the death of a loved one, or a parent with addiction, that part of the brain is constantly on go. And so stress and cortisol turns on that part of the brain and literally shuts down DNA expression and kind of the prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
A kid that's experiencing trauma is going to be focused on running from the bear and not on understanding math, right? And when I give lectures, I'm like, if you don't believe me, like if I let in right now, if all of a sudden they open up the door and 1,000 snakes came into your room, you wouldn't be listening to a word I was saying, right? Your frontal cortex would be shut down. You wouldn't be learning anything. And so I think with trauma, especially, like we were saying earlier, like a lot of clients from Hostage US, they're sitting in their cell in the morning, and all of a sudden that night they're back home. It happens like this. This is another thing that we see a lot is they're not told anything, and all of a sudden they're on a plane going home, and all of a sudden that part of the brain that was just in survival mode for 5-6 years is now still in survival mode, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so it takes a while, but it's possible because, and I think it's a great analogy. If I wake up, if at a young age, I just did curls every day, weightlifting, I just did curls nonstop every day, all day, I would have huge biceps. But if you ran out and told me, hey, go run a mile, I never used my leg muscles. I couldn't do it, right? And you could yell at me and you could say, damn it, run a mile. Come on, just do it. But I'm not able to. I'm not physiologically able to. And it's the same thing with trauma. I could say, hey, just calm down. You're back. Well, you should be happy. And I think a lot of family and friends will do that. But what takes time, if I start training, I could do it. If I start practicing, I could do it. It might take months, it might take years, but I can build that capability. And with neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to regenerate and change based on experience, we can do that. That's a lot of what we do here in our Center for Community Health. We do trauma-informed classes. We do mindfulness. We do meditation. And that's not this kumbaya feel-good thing. It's a scientific ability to form neural pathways to control, the prefrontal cortex to control. But it takes time, and it takes effort, and it takes support too. And so if we don't understand that as a society or family members, and it's fine because none of us do, but if we can begin to understand that, we can better support that process rather than exacerbate trauma by yelling at them or blaming the patients for the trauma they experienced.
Well, I told you that I'm thinking to write my second book about how's the experience coming back. And hearing you, I'm like, okay, it's exciting because really, I do it. I'm going to write it from my humble perspective as a survivor. But
Yeah.
having an expert like you talking is that, you can have a better understanding the process because it's hard. As I was telling you, it's not easy. So that can be another podcast talking about
Yeah,
that.
no, yeah. Honestly, but really quick on that, that would be just a fascinating book because of that level of extreme trauma that you guys experienced. And I think it would. I mean, I think your first book did as well, but I think it would give more insight into just how, how challenging that is, and to have people understand what is involved.
Because imagine, I'm hearing you, and I imagine your brain going around trying to fix. At the same time, you're trying to fix taxes and try to fix the home loan and the mortgage, and you get literally blow-minded. Many things to handle. So it's difficult, really, really difficult.
It is. Yeah, it is.
So we have 10 minutes to come to the end. So I'm going to make you a very personal question because, hearing you, all this process that you have been involved in years, how you deal with all this dehumanization that you are always looking, how you keep your soul in touch.
It's interesting. I love it, man. I mean, Well, a couple of things. We work with the team, so and I've just been extremely lucky. And I'm not saying that to flatter anybody. I've just been lucky with the team that we have, and the people that help run the center, and our community case management team, and our social workers, and our therapists, and our front desk staff. We always say is the most important. When people walk in, just that initial humanization that they provide, and so doing it as a team is like as we jump into the chaos every day with our patients, doing it as a team is really really important. And we just kind of have the mindset like it's always going to be chaos. We're going to have Medicaid expansion. We don't have Medicaid expansion. COVID hit. You have all these different things, changing legislation, and you can get overwhelmed by everything, because when you step back and just look at the ocean, look at the storm, and look at how many people need to be pulled out. But I think the greatest thing that if I ever feel overwhelmed, I just look at the patient in front of me, right? Because that will bring it down to the individual level, and you realize you can only do so much every step of the way. And when I do that, that's how I kind of can ground myself, is just focus on the individuals in front of us and do the best we can for that individual on that day. And being able to do that as a team, I think has helped us, to some extent avoid burnout, and to keep being able to do our job. And then I always say, like, if I ever want to feel sorry for myself, I just have to look up. And I feel like the people who feel the most sorry for themselves are the ones that are probably suffering like people who are really like my patients experiencing homelessness. It's almost like they don't have time to complain, but the resilience that they have is amazing. So if I ever want to whine about my own situation, I just look at their resilience and what they're dealing with on a daily basis, and I shut up and I don't whine. Like it puts things in perspectives. And
Yeah.
I have a lot of patients who have kind of become role models for me. One of the women that I dedicated my book to, Joe Angarino, was definitely in this case where, because life is about, what you do with what's given to you, and the situations that is provided to you, and what our patients are able to do with the cards that they've been dealt, is just a cool example about how you approach life. So,
well, coming to the end, Brian, if you want to leave us one truth, something that doesn't come from the books, come from your experience holding the hands of the people in a corner, what will be that truth for you?
When you're going through life, be comfortable enough not to always focus on yourself. And what I mean by that is stop, listen, think, and get to know people around you, everybody. And I think the world is a much more beautiful place than a lot of us think. If you just look up, you see the beauty in others, and you see the resilience in others. And, that's part of the struggles, is like a lot of our patients suffer and even die. And the world missed their beauty and missed their awesomeness, and that's a pity for them, but it's also a pity for us. I think the world and humanity is a lot. The extremes of darkness get a lot of publicity. I get a lot of, for whatever reason, but
it's noisy. It's noisy.
It is, and I don't know why we're so obsessed with hate and evil, and but and just look at the movies we watch and things like that. But ultimately, I think in my experience, and we've served thousands of patients now, they're just good people. They're people who've been traumatized. There's people who have done bad things in the context of tribe, but for the most part, the vast majority are incredible, awesome people. And if we can stop, and again, it's kind of like a religious message too. I mean, that's one of the messages we hear. If we can stop and appreciate that, our lives become cooler.
Well, Brian, there has been an incredible show. I encourage the audience that are hearing this. If you're gonna be, I'm gonna air it this Monday. It's gonna show like it was live. It's gonna be restreamed, and I leave recorded in my YouTube channel. So everybody that's hearing this, well, this is something that is incredible. If you're going through any situation in your life, you have here an expert talking about this, and I get that takeaway of your message that the good is much better than the bad. So sometimes the bad is very noisy, but the goods are much more than the bad guys.
Yeah, well, you're living proof of that. You're living
Yeah.
proof of that. Honestly,
Yeah.
you are. That's why it's such an honor to be on the show with you. So
No, okay. Well, Ryan, has been a great show. So we're gonna wrap up here. Final words you want to say?
no, just thank you. Thank you. It's been a blast. It's been so much fun reconnecting with you.
Okay. Well, see you Monday. Is gonna be aired this show. Okay. Blessing.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Thanks, Jose.
Bye.
What if everything you knew about leadership was wrong? What if true leadership wasn't about power, but about service? The world is changing, and those who lead with impact and empathy are the ones reshaping the future. Welcome to Viral Podcast Experience, where influence is built on impact, and success is measured by the lives you transform. Today's world is in crisis. Leaders are disconnected. Businesses are crumbling. Employees are disengaged. Traditional leadership models are failing, and people are looking for something different. Leaders who serve, not dictate. A leader who empowers, not controls. A leader who listens before they speak. But here's the truth. Leadership isn't about titles. It's about action. It's about the legacy you build through the lives you touch. Now imagine a world where leadership looks different, where a CEO doesn't command from the top, but inspires from within, where managers don't control, but empower and uplift. This is the era of actionable servant leadership, and it's transforming businesses, communities, and lives. Lead by listening. The best leaders ask, "How can I serve you?" Before giving orders, seek to understand. Serve first, succeed. Second, true leaders put people first. When you uplift your team, success naturally follows. Empower, don't control. Replace micromanagement with trust. Give people the tools and freedom to excel. Actionable servant leadership isn't a theory. It's a superpower that unlocks human potential. The world is looking for leaders who serve, lead, and inspire. Will you step up? Will you be the leader who changes the game? This is your moment.